he's unwilling to believe any of their statements that they have experienced persecution. But Dr. Sternberg summarized the discrimination taken against him as follows. Quote, I was transferred from the supervision of a friendly sponsor supervisor at the museum to a hostile one. I was twice forced to move specimens from my office space on short notice for no good reason, with my nameplate removed from my door, and eventually I was deprived of all official museum space and forced to use a shared work area as my museum work location. I was subjected to an array of new reporting requirements not imposed on any other research associates. My access to the specimens needed for my research at the museum was restricted. My access to the museum was also restricted. I was forced to give up my master key. Rather than admit that any of this evidence exists, Shermer happily applies infinite skepticism to the persecuted and withholds all skepticism from the statements of the persecutors. Shermer even emailed Jonathan Coddington, the chief persecutor of Richard Sternberg, asking him about the situation. It comes as no surprise that Dr. Coddington personally wrote back to Shermer, claiming that there was nothing to see here. In Coddington's words, quote, Sternberg was not discriminated against, he was never dismissed, and in fact, he was not even a paid employee, but just an unpaid research associate who had completed his 3-year term, unquote. This is consistent with Coddington's prior behavior, as the Congressional Staff Investigations Report concluded, quote, given the factual record, the Smithsonian's pro forma denials of discrimination are unbelievable, unquote. So are Shermer's denials. And how did Eugenie Scott handle the situation? Unlike Coddington, Scott did not deny that Sternberg was ousted when she spoke to the Washington Post, but rather she admitted that there was an ousting of Sternberg and tried to justify it. Quote, said Eugenie Scott, the group's executive director, if this was a corporation and an employee did something that was really embarrassed the administration, really blew it, how long do you think that person would be employed? Scott of the NCSE insisted that Smithsonian scientists had no choice to explore Sternberg's religious beliefs. They don't care if you're religious, but they do care a lot if you are a creationist, Scott said. Sternberg denies it, but if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it argues for zealotry, unquote. So there you have it. What Jonathan Coddington denies, Eugenie Scott essentially admits and justifies because she thinks it's permissible to persecute and investigate someone if they sympathize with the creationists. If Michael Shermer should be skeptical of anything, it's the contradictory claims of the Smithsonian and leading Darwinists like Eugenie Scott, which expose the attempts to cover up the unfair treatment of Dr. Sternberg. Thus we see Shermer's method of dismissing the discrimination of Darwin skeptics is as follows. 1. Ignore all the facts showing there was persecution. 2. Email the persecutor and ask them if there is any anti-ID discrimination. And 3. Withhold all skepticism from the statements of the persecutors and then trumpet their response as evidence that there is no persecution against ID proponents, blaming the victim for losing their job, and then claiming that those who feel there was persecution are just promoting a, quote, conspiracy. While attacking Stephen Meyer's article in Proceedings for the Biological Society of Washington, Shermer briefly discusses the Cambrian explosion, a major topic in Meyer's paper. Shermer states that the explosion is just an illusion because, quote, according to paleontologist Donald Prothero, in his 2007 magisterial book Evolution, What the Fossils Say and Why It Matters, quote, the major groups of invertebrate fossils do not appear suddenly at the base of the Cambrian, but are spaced out over strata spanning 80 million years, hardly an instantaneous explosion. Some groups appear tens of million years after the others, and preceding the Cambrian explosion was a long, slow build-up to the first appearance of typical Cambrian shelled invertebrates, unquote. Is that correct? Prothero's book is hard to take seriously, because as we shall see, it reads more like a polemic than a serious academic treatment. Consider these statements from Prothero's book. Quote, the creationist political pressure, propaganda, and liars are not restricted to public schools, unquote. Or, quote, if the fundamentalists continue to expand their political power, we are in for another inquisition, with the religious fanatics suppressing and destroying books and evidence and harassing anyone who doesn't agree with them, unquote. Or, quote, many scientists and authors have written how uplifting and liberating the scientific worldview can be for humankind, especially in comparison to the vengeful God of the Old Testament, unquote. Prothero's book is clearly one with an agenda that falls short of a calm, collected, objective scientific analysis. But if we want to understand the Cambrian explosion, we have to turn to serious scientific treatments, not Prothero's polemic. So what do the textbooks say? A 2001 invertebrate zoology textbook that is a serious scientific textbook states, quote, most of the animal phyla that are represented in the fossil record appear fully formed in the Cambrian some 550 million years ago. The fossil record is therefore of no help with respect to the origin and early diversification of the various animal phyla, unquote. In fact, Richard Dawkins conceded in 1986 regarding the Cambrian fauna that, quote, it is as though they were just planted there, without any evolutionary history, unquote. In another very serious treatment of the subject, John Maynard Smith and Eeyore Sathmary, leaders in evolutionary biology, wrote in 1995 that, quote, the Cambrian explosion remains a puzzle, unquote, for Darwinian theorists despite the discovery of a few Precambrian fossils. Writing in the Major Transitions in Evolution, they say, quote, some 540 million years ago at the beginning of the Cambrian, there appeared an array of multicellular marine animals, including the major phyla that exists today, colenorants, platyhelminths, annelids, arthropods, mollusks, echinoderms, and others. Chordates are also present in the Cambrian, though they are not known from the earliest deposits, in which only hard parts are preserved, but are present in the slightly later Burgess Shale, in which soft-bodied forms are preserved. 40 years ago, this sudden appearance of Metazoan fossils was not only a puzzle, but something of an embarrassment. The absence of any known fossils from earlier rocks was a weapon widely used by creationists. Today, the fossil evidence for the prokaryotes goes back 3,000 million years, and for protists, some 1,000 million years. The Cambrian explosion remains a puzzle, however, which has only been fitfully illuminated by the discovery of the enigmatic soft-bodied Ediacaran fauna, which still have a worldwide distribution between 580 and 560 million years ago. There are still doubts about how these fossils should be interpreted, unquote. It seems that Prothero has glossed over the real problems with evolutionary explanations of the Cambrian fauna in a book that hardly looks like a serious treatment of the subject. In the end, Shermer needs to apply some of his famous skepticism to his own sources. Shermer's second case of blaming the victim was with Dr. Guillermo Gonzalez, as Shermer blames pro-ID astronomer Guillermo Gonzalez for being denied tenure at Iowa State University, or ISU. But who is the expert that Shermer consults on this case? It's none other than Eugenie Scott, Executive Director of the National Center for Science Education. Scott had many complaints against Gonzalez's academic record, which I'll scrutinize one at a time. First, Scott claimed that while at ISU, Gonzalez's, quote, publication record tanked, unquote. But according to the Smithsonian NASA Astrophysics Data System, Gonzalez has published 34 publications since 2001, the year he joined ISU, and his normalized publication score is second among all astronomers in his department. As Rob Crowther has observed, quote, he peaks in 2003, but ends in 2006, just as high as he was when he started ISU. Moreover, he outperformed all ISU astronomy faculty in normalized publications during that period. The one year that is obviously yet less happens to be the same year that he co-authored an astronomy textbook published by Cambridge University Press. Not only that, but Gonzalez led astronomers in his department in normalized count of citations to his work in scientific papers. As noted, Gonzalez joined ISU in 2001, and for his publication since 2001, he has the highest normalized citation count of all astronomers in his department, including both tenured and untenured faculty. Moreover, despite the fact that he is much younger than many of the tenured faculty in his department, he has the second highest lifetime normalized citation count among all astronomers in his department. Given that Gonzalez apparently led all tenured ISU astronomers who voted against his tenure in both normalized publication count and normalized citation count since 2001, it's hard to see what grounds they have for complaining about his publication record. If Gonzalez's publication record did go down at all during his probationary period at ISU, it still remained at an extremely impressive level that warranted tenure. If anything, this indicates that scientists should not be penalized for extraordinarily high academic achievement rates earlier in their careers if, like Gonzalez, they continue to produce outstanding publication rates during their probationary tenure period. Next, Shermer quotes Eugenie Scott claiming that Gonzalez, quote, didn't have very many graduate students, and those he had never completed their degrees, unquote. This is a blatant falsehood, first promulgated by anti-ID groups in Iowa. As I explained to Iowa Citizens for Science when they made the same claim, quote, that statement is completely false. The truth is that in 2001, soon before Gonzalez left the University of Washington to join the faculty at ISU, he served as the primary advisor to a UW doctoral student in astronomy, Chris Laws. Gonzalez served as Laws' primary scientific advisor over the course of Laws' entire doctoral thesis, and Laws successfully graduated from UW with a PhD in astronomy in December 2004. Gonzalez also served on the committee of another PhD student at UW, Rory Barnes, and this student also successfully graduated in 2004, unquote. It's worth noting also that pre-tenure faculty typically are not expected to have as many graduate students as tenure faculty, because pre-tenured faculty are supposed to focus primarily on their own research. So even if Scott's complaints were accurate, they are of little relevance. Shermer should start applying some of his skepticism to the false claims of the pro-Darwin lobbyists like Eugenie Scott.